I just draw the attention of the committee to today's roll call.
Everybody be quiet.
I'm getting some heartening news here, but I'm not getting it until I know your password.
No, come on.
Good afternoon.
Good morning. Good morning. Good morning.
People talk about immigration, DACA.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I noticed a smirk on your face. We find it laughable as well.
And I doubt if it's going to do much good for me just to hold up a small sheet of paper.
How many of you went to Blockbuster Video last weekend?
I like it all. It's all good stuff.
Negotiating with President Trump
He said that they all said.
is like negotiating with Jell-O.
Disagree with certain things that they said. I think I'm right, but time will prove that. Time will prove me right, probably.
Look, I think there's a technical description for what's going on, which is that Democrats have gone bat crap crazy.
And when I read the document, my reaction to it was, this is really an interesting draft.
You weren't supposed to do that.
Just another corrupt official. Why would you come to my office?
You can sit there and say, yeah, but this is an uncredible witness because he was saying one thing just a few months ago.
Congresswoman Lowy, can you come over and talk to us here for a minute, please?
Wow.
What's the news? What's the news?
The gentleman yield?
No, if I did, I would already tell you. You already had your time to talk.
Yes, no
Well, she
shame.
blew-
Love that, Chad. That's
Well, she blew you a
Okay,
kiss
so that's-
anyway. That was worth something.
Well, I'd rather have the news.
This is, of course, a picture of former President Ronald Reagan naturally firing a machine gun while riding on the back of a dinosaur.
Talking about
Mentioned my name. I was hoping the
I
gentleman
said I
would
wasn't
yield.
going to yield to you. You can shut up now.
This is a beloved species of reptile mammal, according to a report a long time ago, and issued far, far away.
Well, I don't think I'll respond to all of that.
They may even be fully recyclable and usable for their warmth.
You got it.
Welcome to another episode of the Jay Lex Podcast. Please like, share, and subscribe to the content. You know where to find it. Thank you for rocking with me and tuning in today. Today's episode. Why would you end a friendship over political differences? I saw a post recently from somebody who I follow on Facebook, who I've known for a long time. I think it might have been the actress, or it was like a repost of something the actress Jennifer Lawrence said. I'm paraphrasing, but essentially... she basically said that she can't F with people who aren't involved in politics. And it got me thinking, you're really going to end a friendship over the fact that somebody disagreed with you politically, or for that matter, is not politically involved? Now, there's different ways you can be politically involved. You can talk about it on social media. You can go onto that cesspool known as Twitter. Like, there's so many different ways you could be involved. You can be more involved kind of locally, whether it's the PTA or whether it's more local political causes or whatever the case might be. But it got me thinking, is this, and that, obviously I have never been, involved. I've been involved a little bit, but it's more kind of at a distance. People often ask me what my political affiliation is. I ultimately say, I don't care for any of them because they're all the same to me, basically. They're all just hustling and trying to do their best to get money out of you and make promises and et cetera, unless you are super rich, super wealthy, or you're well-connected. In the grand scheme of things, you don't matter politically. And so I get why certain people do not want to talk about politics, why they want to stay away from politics. It's just not, it's not worth it. It's the WWE. I'll give you a primary example. Was it about a week or two ago? Joe Biden, Presidente, goes and basically says if you make under 125K or something like that, that you're basically, depending on how much debt you have, up to $10,000 will be wiped out. That's great for those. Now, I'm fortunately at the point where my student loan debt is down to its last couple $100s. I'm very happy. It'll improve my credit, et cetera, et cetera. It took longer than it should have, but nevertheless, it is going to be over within a few months. Great for me. one of the things that I often like to, but some people I know, some friends of mine in particular, went back to school, going to get their master's, their doctorate, their postdoctorate, and so they have to take on more debt. We all know how stupidly expensive an education in this country is. Okay? It is ridiculous, especially if you go to a private school. Some of these private schools are so goddamn expensive for undergrad, it's unbelievable. It's crazy. You know, I remember a couple years back, people got very upset about it. It was the whole, was it the testing? Like there were like 50 people who got arrested because they were going to this gentleman who was basically getting their kids either into a school or saying that they played a sport when they didn't, the whole bit. Clearly we know it's wrong. But ultimately, I'm not all that surprised by it. I wasn't surprised when I heard about it. The only thing I was surprised by is only 50 people got arrested. Clearly, like 1,000 people, 2,000 people should have been arrested. But they said, we're going to send the pawns to prison, like Aunt Becky from Full House. We're going to send them to prison. We're going to make sure that we distract people. There's other people in the background who are doing, shady shit. It is what it is. So I remember people on both sides of the aisle, as it pertains to the student loans, let me go back to that, were arguing. Because on the one hand, people who weren't making the kind of money, who weren't making six figures, were like, well, this is great because it pays down my student loan debt. But people on the other side were like, well, wait a minute. I worked my ass off. I went to school. I paid my debt on my own. I'm making six figures. And so those people started going back and forth because the one side said that there was, discriminatory practices. We know that wages are. I worked for somebody for a long time. I think I got 1 or 2 raises if I was lucky. I got a little bit on the back end because I got like some tips and things like that. But that's neither here nor there. The reality is we know wages are stagnant, whether you're in the private sector or more in the public sector, unless you work, in Congress, like everybody else is basically, for the most part, stuck. You get a little bit of a pay raise, but also rent goes up, we all know about inflation and everything like that, and there's no adjustment for that. But what I came to realize was, when I heard these arguments, I looked and I said, well, you're both right. And somebody asked, well, what do you mean? You're both right. There are practices that only hired certain people, and with wages not going up, it was very difficult, especially if you had like a liberal arts degree or something like that. You can't really do anything with a liberal arts degree. I have a psych degree. I've literally done nothing with that psych degree. You know what I'm saying? Like, I've done little to nothing with it. Like, it just basically said I graduated college. That's all that it was. I have a BA in psychology with a minor in social. Literally, unless you're going to be a high school or a college professor or a teacher of some kind, and you're going to continue on, there is nothing you can do. There's nothing you can do with that degree. One of the other things, like I said before, while on the one hand, the people who were arguing, yes, get rid of my debt, at least some of it, so I get a little bit of relief, the other side is right as well. The other side has every right to come out and say, well, wait a minute, I worked my behind off. I got a degree that was going to make me some money. Now they're making, high 5, low 6 figures. Maybe some of them are making 7 figures. And they have a lifestyle to maintain. And they don't want their tax money going to something that they weren't involved in. They chose a career that was going to make them good money. Now, it's not a slight against anybody. It's just the reality of it. Those are the facts. They made a decision to go into some form of business or one of the sciences, and they make good money. If you become like a chemical engineer or something like that, you're going to make really good money. They studied their behinds off. They got a civil engineering degree, whatever the case might be. So once again, I look and I say, you're both right simultaneously. Nobody's wrong in this situation. But what I wanted to get at is when I saw this post, I came to realize, maybe I did before and I wasn't paying attention, but more and more people are ending friendships over political differences or political inactivity. And I just don't get that. People, the days of, I shouldn't say that they're over, obviously, because they're not. But back in the day, it made more sense, like a Martin Luther King or a Malcolm X, because they legitimately were fighting to get equal freedoms as their Caucasian counterparts. It made sense. And so I could understand then why they wouldn't want to rock with somebody who had a different political ideology, because ultimately they were fighting for their freedom. They were fighting for the right to vote. They were fighting for equality. It makes sense. You know, when Colin Kaepernick, under the Trump administration, took that knee for police brutality, it got turned into something completely and totally different. And what happened to him was terrible. I know part of it was also the way that he played, but that's another story for another day. But ultimately, as much as Colin Kaepernick got involved politically from that standpoint, and I agreed with what he was doing, Colin Kaepernick wasn't on 24/7. Colin Kaepernick had to turn that off at some point just so he could hang with his girlfriend, so he could, go and enjoy a nice meal somewhere where he didn't have to constantly talk about politics, where he didn't have to constantly talk about police brutality. And so when I see certain people sitting there, I saw this one poll, I guess, as I mentioned before, and I see people just basically like, if you're not active politically, however that is, whether it's social media, which ultimately doesn't mean anything, you complaining doesn't mean anything without action, but if you're not involved politically, then I can't mess with you anymore. Why are we separating ourselves from other people because they're not politically active? There's nothing fun about politics. Zero. And so if somebody wants to, after a long day of working, after a long day of either working for somebody or working independently, wants to tune out politics, I completely and totally and utterly get it. And another question that I have is, are you tuning that person out because they're not active politically, or are you tuning them out because you don't agree with their opinion? You see, well, on the one hand, I don't agree with any of it, but are you disagreeing with that person? And what if they're on the opposite side of the aisle? Are you no longer talking to that person? Because that happens a lot, and that happens a lot more than you'd anticipate. People think, there's really no room to disagree with people politically. If you're on the leaning more left or liberal, quote unquote, then there's a good chance that person's not going to talk to you anymore, which I think is really messed up. Where we should be allowed to disagree with one another without it turning into, unless you're just saying that friendship wasn't that important to you anyway. But if it was, how can you then turn around and no longer befriend or hang with somebody who you disagree with politically? Because I think that's where it's going, for the most part. People who disagree with one another, for some odd reason, can no longer be friends. So I'm not talking about the extremes. I'm talking about, I make a little more money, so I like to keep a little more of my money, versus somebody who doesn't make the same amount of money, who wants to, who thinks that the rich should pay their fair share. And I get that point. But if you're somebody who can, how do I phrase it? If you're somebody who's making a little more money, you're going to want to keep more of your money. As I mentioned before, you have a lifestyle to obtain. Or a lifestyle to maintain, excuse me. To obtain and eventually maintain. You want to be able to keep more of your money so that, you might want to get a boat. It's a little bit of, it's a money pit, but nevertheless, that might be an interest of yours. You might want a bigger house. You might want all these things that are, some of which are vanity driven, but a lot of which are investments. You might want to invest more. You might want to put more money in the bank for your children. Or your future children, or whatever the case might be. I've seen so much disagreement and so much name calling because these individuals happen to disagree with one another. And if you don't agree with what they're saying, they'll call you names. Even if they don't do it to your face, they'll call it behind your back. They can't just say, you know what, we disagree on this. All right, cool. What time do you want to go to dinner? Or what time do you want to go, get a cup of coffee? Or, hey, how are the children doing? Friendships are ending over political beliefs that ultimately the politicians do not care. Go and check how much Congress makes. The average person in Congress makes. Was it 500 plus people in there? Go and check how much they make annually. Go and check. They have Cadillac insurance. You think they give a damn about you and your friend harping and arguing on different sides of the aisle? If anything, they're happy that you're doing that. They're happy that you guys are sitting there arguing amongst yourselves. You're distracted. While they're going out there giving out the contracts, defense contracts to the rebuilding of Ukraine, as an example. Remember when that was like the hot topic? You think they stopped giving money to that war, that proxy BS war? And y'all are sitting here arguing over nonsense. Meanwhile, billions and trillions of your dollars are being burnt on an illegitimate war. And you will be the same people, either side of the aisle, who will go out in November and who will vote for those same individuals. How many decades has Nancy Pelosi been in Congress? Mitch McConnell, Chuck Schumer, Lindsey Graham? All these people, they have Cadillac insurance. They make up to $150K a year. That's not counting the donations that they get. These people are worth tens of millions, if not hundreds, in some cases, hundreds of millions of dollars. How can public servants, public workers essentially, be worth that kind of money? But you guys continue to argue amongst yourselves. You guys end friendships, 10, 15, 20-year friendships, because somebody decided, you know what, I've had enough. I'm tired of politics. Talking shit on Twitter is not getting politically involved. It's talking shit on Twitter. That's all it is. Just because you jump on your Twitter and give your political opinion means diddly squat. All it is content for whoever, or Elon Musk, or whomever it is that owns Twitter right now, or Facebook, or any other place that you go to vent your frustrations. Those companies monetize off your content. YouTube, etc. And y'all are sitting here arguing amongst yourselves as if it means anything at the end of the day. It doesn't. They don't care about you. They never have. You're just somebody who they use as a pawn, or that they get they get emotionally or who, how do I say it? How they use you, or they use your emotions to distract you, I should say. That's what I want to say. They don't want you thinking critically. Yes, you can disagree. You think Malcolm and Martin agreed upon everything? All the outward infighting that I see amongst people. You think those guys agreed all the time? They wanted the same thing. They just wanted to do it in different ways. And both were right. There were times where it was good to be civil, and then other times where sometimes, you know what, you got to put your foot on somebody's neck. But when they came out together, they were united, instead of bickering at each other on some goddamn social media site that you don't even own. Because somehow black equals Democrat, which makes no goddamn sense. And anybody else who's outside of that is somehow an Uncle Tom. Neither party cares for you. They don't. It's only done that way just so that there's no other options. The two-party system is a dead thing. And y'all still, amongst yourselves, argue and argue and argue and argue. It's irrelevant. What you should be doing is putting your differences aside, saying, I disagree with this, I disagree with that, but I agree with this. Let's go out there and put pressure upon these politicians to get real change done. Whether it's reparations, whether it's taking care of the taking care of the poverty thing, whatever your particular passion is, because everybody's a little bit different. Get into a room, keep your cell phones out, argue, curse at each other, and then come as a united front. Instead of constantly being at opposite ends of the aisle, arguing with each other, as if that makes a difference. It doesn't. They don't care for you. They never have. I've said it 100,000 times, even as I've done this show. They don't care for you politically. They're not your friends. When you go to that poll in November, when in a few weeks, I should say, don't vote with your heart. Because they don't care for you. Vote the way that you're supposed to vote. Put your foot on their proverbial necks. And say, this is what I want, A, B, C, D, Z. Whichever direction that might be. Oh, you don't want to do that for me? Cool, no problem. I'm going this way. When you do that, because of the system that we have, you might see real change. We don't want any more wars. Oh, you're going to continue going to war and making money off of it? Cool, no problem. You don't get my vote. It's that simple. Now, they might go in and steal an election here or there because we know it can happen. But you did your part. You showed them that this wasn't about emotion, that this wasn't about your feelings. This was about results. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of the Jay Lex Podcast. Please like, share, and subscribe to content. Take care. Bye.